Welcome, everyone. We'll wait just a few more minutes to let everyone log in. But in the meantime, welcome. Should be a few more coming in, but we can get started. Maybe at 4:03, I can get it started. 4:03 Singapore time here. Welcome in, welcome in. Just a few things to note before we start. We actually will be taking questions at the end, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat, and then we'll get those answered at the end during our Q&A session. Wait just one more minute, and then we can get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. I believe we have a lot of people in. Some may come in a little bit later, but that's all right. Welcome to Mastering Airport Wildlife Management from Policy to Practice. I see some familiar faces and some not so familiar faces, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Sam Lievense, a wildlife ecologist here at Mastermark in Singapore. So again, I already stated this, but I want to make sure everyone is aware. Please do feel free to write down any questions that they have in the chat, and we can get to those at the end of the presentation. So that's going to be our Q&A session. But just for the sake of time, we won't be doing it throughout the presentation, just at the very end. All right, so moving forward, again, I'm Sam from Mastermark, and if you're unaware of who exactly Mastermark is, we're the wildlife hazard management company in Singapore, and for Changi's Airport Group, CAG, we're their principal wildlife consultant. So we do work across the region. And also, most recently, actually last week, I was actually in Cambodia with some of the team. We were actually helping out the new airport in Cambodia, Techo. So we were helping out with their wildlife hazard management and dispersals. So that's just one of the fun projects that we get to do. A key factor about Mastermark, what kind of sets us apart and what we kind of strive for is to also a big takeaway from this webinar is to kind of manage the perspectives of three different perspectives. One being an airport biologist like myself, or a more scientific perspective when it comes to airport wildlife hazard management. Also, we like to look at managerial kind of a policy aspect on what we're looking at, and that's also super important. So, you know, what ICAO and CAAs may think about the topic. And then also, last but not least, one of the more important aspects to look at is any personnel that are on the ground. So your ground ops perspective, what dispersal tools are working for them, what's not. So we like to kind of look at all three of those perspectives when we come to conclusions of, you know, creating a WHMP or looking at this topic, this very vague topic that is wildlife hazard management as a whole. So with that being said, the speakers today are myself, Sam Lievense. So I come from the more ecologist, wildlife scientific perspective today. And then also we're very lucky to have Nick Yearwood with us. He's from International Bird Strike, and Nick, in no way to age you, Nick, has many years of experience in the CAA, and he's kind of the go-to guy when it comes to making sense of wildlife hazard management policy. And then next, we have Mubaraq. Mubarak actually works with me in Mastermark, so he's caught everything from crocodiles to golden retrievers. So he has a lot of on-the-ground wildlife trapping capture experience, and he's the go-to guy for anything wildlife hazard management from a ground ops perspective. So that's going to be anything from gas cannons to stock whips to monkey gel blaster guns and more. So Mubarak is your go-to guy for that. So that rounds up our speakers for today. Again, I'm Sam, we have Nick, and we also have Mubarak with us. So the objectives of today. What we wanted to create this webinar for is to go through 4 commonly discussed hot topics in wildlife hazard management and to go through those 3 perspectives on each topic. So I'll go through a topic and then I'll start with kind of my scientific research background, kind of perspectives from that. Then I'll hand it off to Nick with a policy perspective. Nick will hand it off to Mubarak on a more ground ops, what he's actually seeing at the airport perspective. So hopefully by the end of this hour, I know it's a very short period of time, but hopefully we'll gain something out of it. So we encourage this integrated approach to combine all of these things for just whether that be you're looking to update a WHMP or come up with a wildlife operations flow chart, or maybe you're writing policy, any of these things you want to take into account these perspectives when it comes to all of these different aspects of wildlife hazard management. So without further ado, I do note that we have a few more individuals joining us. So again, I'm Sam here, and we have Nick and Mubarak. Nick, did you have something to say here?
No, it was a mistake.
He rose his hand. All right, cool. So I will get us started here. And again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those down in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. So the first topic that I wanted to go over today is reporting and data. So from my biologist perspective here, I want to emphasize the role of accurate species identification and good data, and what good data looks like, and how good data to a biologist who is a bird nerd might be different from good data from an airport's perspective. So again, I'll go over my aspect and then I'll send it over to Nick and Mubarak after for theirs as well. So good data, something to also think about is it's important as an airport ecologist not to only note trends of different species observed in the airport, but also to make sense of those. So to look into different things like bird age class. So maybe let's look at eagles, for example. Instead of just noting down that I see or I'm observing eagles, I might want to observe the bird age class. So maybe juvenile eagles, or we have a subadult eagle. So these kind of nuances in data might actually help your WHMP or your mitigation of damaging bird strikes, because what we've found is that a lot of times juvenile raptors or eagles or kites or birds actually get hit more than the adults. So that might be good information for the airport to know. So that's one example. Another example of good data might be migratory season. So is this bird here all the time, or just some of the time? Maybe you want to hype up the dispersals or the surveys when migratory season is versus when it's not. So that could be an example of good data, as well as for some of your high-risk birds, which I'll get into in a little bit. But for our high-risk birds, we want to know the direction where certain birds may be flying, because if you can determine the flight patterns over the runways, that's really good information for your airport to know and maybe to future mitigate. So this kind of data is more useful to an airport than, say, if I just went out, counted all the birds, gave it in a report, and it just sat on a bookshelf, right? So we actually want to find solutions and good data that we can trend to hopefully minimize damaging strikes and maybe minimize or maybe optimize your WHMP. So another thing that I kind of spoke about a little earlier was high risk birds. What could that mean? Another thing I wanted to talk about is basically not all bird strikes are created equally. So let's say that there is a really small bird like a swallow or a sparrow that only comes in a certain amount of time, and sure, you find the carcass. That might be a lower risk bird because it's not as prevalent in the airport and it's also a smaller mass. What you want to do is maybe look for birds with larger mass that are more abundant in your airport. So once you do that, you can kind of come up with your high risk species and maybe even your high risk zones if you want to zone out an airport. So airports are very, very big, and you might not have all the resources in the world, but you do have some resources, and maybe you want to pinpoint those resources to those specific high risk zones or high risk species. So you're targeting those species instead of every single bird, because as we know, there's hundreds and hundreds of bird species out there, so it can be hard to mitigate every single species. But if you pick just a few high-risk bird species that you see, maybe there's a strike history of these birds that are involved in damaging strikes. You want to focus on mitigating those, and all of that would kind of be from good data from a biologist or someone on the field doing reporting and data. So I could go on and on and on about this because I'm a self-proclaimed bird nerd, but we do have two other perspectives. So I'm going to hand it off to Nick here, and he will go over more of a policy perspective on reporting and data. Nick, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, it's morning here. I'm not sure wherever you are, it's probably the afternoon. There's not many from Western Europe or the UK that I could see. It's good to see some familiar faces, my friends from around the globe. Hello, everybody. Good day to those of you where, down under. And also, salam alaikum to my brethren in the Asian subcontinent. I have family in Pakistan and India. Not a lot of people know that, and that's first line relatives in the Asian subcontinent. So, salam alaikum. It's really interesting to be invited again to participate and support Master Mark with their ambitions and the work they're doing. Great work around the globe. And this is just really a brief snapshot into what will be discussed later in the day, but also in other places and other training and courses. But I have a really different perspective, perhaps, from the guys who are talking, Sam and Moobs, because I haven't been a regulator for, let's say, best part of 40 years, 36.9, maybe 37 years. And latterly, a bird strike coordinator for the UK CAA, policy coordinator, policy writer in a national and international context. I have a very different objective and a view from looking down to what you guys are doing. And I often have a different perspective in terms of I've written the regulations, I've inspected regulations, I've done compliance monitoring, I've done auditing and inspecting of airports and airport authorities, and I've also helped and mentored other CAAs around the world. And we all have a different snapshot from a regulatory policy perspective in do we even need regulation? And I've seen and I've written so many regulations, and yet we still see lots of bird strikes, lots of damage in bird strikes. But all the places I've been to will demonstrate to me that they are fully compliant with the regulation. So notwithstanding the regulation or the standards, national or international, ICAO or their local or regional, EASA, FAA, whatever template of standards and regulation they wish to adhere to, they're still suffering with lots of bird strikes. So we get to a position where the regulations are almost, they just sit there on their own, and they just sit and they're very static. But what I like to look at is, what does good look like? So the question I often ask people, what do you think good looks like? So I've seen very bad and bad, and all the places that have been, I think, bad and very bad are all fully compliant with Annex 14, with their national regulations. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that something isn't working. And the piece that perhaps we haven't really explored, but people are starting to talk about, and we'll talk about that more perhaps today and further on later in the year when we do the course, is performance and effectiveness. So how do airports measure and assess the performance of their teams doing wildlife hazard management? What does that even mean, performance? And I've talked to people who are doing the job and said, what does good look like? And how do you measure your performance? Or I've talked to managers about how they assess the performance and how they assess the effectiveness of what they are doing. And they look at you with a blank expression because there isn't a single way or a template that says this is what good looks like, this is the performance measurement necessarily. So we're very much still talking about in a new language. It's not about compliance, it's working beyond compliance. It's working with the mindset of SMS. Again, we've been talking about SMS and everything for years. We've talked about data, need for good data, which Sam alluded to. And we've talked about the people, about the training and the tools that they need, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's really important that I want to sort of stress to people to think about. It's not just about compliance and adherence to strict rules, which are written by people who have never done the job, as such as you guys. They've never either inspected, they've never run an airport, they've never done wildlife hazard or bird control at an airport. And so they're written by, let's say, office people a long, long way from the front end where you guys are working. So we need to think about performance more than compliance. And I think that will be enough for now in this kind of opening session, or the opening 4 minutes or so I've got on this subject. But it's really about thinking about, we need data and we need to understand who's reporting data, why data isn't being reported, that we have a just culture of reporting data. There's no fear of punitive actions, or why should there be, or why people would think about not report. And I have been to airports where they decide not to report because it affects their KPIs or SPIs, and they will argue all day long that a bird pickup off the runway was not a bird strike. It was a vortex or jet wash or prop wash, and they will argue their position all day long. And the only reason why they do that is because they have safety management performance indicators, which they want to keep flat or reduced, not have more and more birds being picked up off the runway or within the overshoot and undershoot of runways. So there's no real regulation that covers that. This is about mindset. So that's, I think, for today's perspective, it's about thinking about the mindset of why we need to be doing things and why we should not be not reporting. We want to give as much information to those who need the data as possible it's not used as a punitive measure by the regulator. That's probably enough for now, Sam.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. Moops, take us over to, sorry, Mubarak, we also call Moobs if anyone's confused. But
Yeah, it's a pretty long
Mubarak,
name, so Moops is rather short. All right.
we can head on over to
So-
your slides now.
Sure. All right. So hi everyone. So I'm here to talk more about the challenges on the on-ground perspective of our wildlife hazard. So speaking about this, so it is also a time pressure. So it depends on what time it is of the day, whether it's full of flights, the runway is being used, and whether the presence of a carcass, what do we do? So normally, based on our on-ground perspective, what we do is we would determine if the carcass is a hazard. If it's a hazard to the runway, then of course it's a FOD. So we will contact the tower, we'll try to close the runway, and we'll go down to collect the carcass. So carcasses can come in a lot of ways, like what Nick and Sam mentioned. And the importance of carcass collection is so we can work closely with our biologist, and we can determine whether the carcass is a juvenile or an adult bird, and also we can also get to know whether it's eating something on the runway for us to properly manage the situation. So once carcasses is collected, it's always important for us to have freezers in our airport for us to properly store and preserve the carcass, so we can hand it over to our biologist in a more better condition rather than a rotten carcass. It's pretty hard. So basically, for carcass collection, we have a few pointers to take note of. For example, like the presence of a full carcass or just some bits of it. Even if it's some bits of it, we can also collect it. We can take blood samples, and we can also ensure what type of species it is for the carcass. Yep, so pretty short one for me. Also for the training of species ID, it's very important that most of our ground staff are familiar with the birds around the vicinity or in the airport area, because we need to also determine why the birds are there, whether it's a migratory bird or a local bird, we need to know, to better protect our airbase. Yep. So short one for me and back to Sam.
Thanks, Moves.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so again, if anyone is just joining us, what we're doing here is going through different hot topics of different airport wildlife biologist topics here, and kind of going through the different perspectives. So again, we'll start out with me, Sam, from a more biological view of identifying and managing wildlife attractants. And then we'll head over to Nick from a policy view, and then ending with Mubarak for a more of a ground ops view. So identifying and managing wildlife attractants. To me, what I immediately think about is habitat modification in and around the airport. So that's super important that I don't just say in the airport, but I'll get to that in a bit. So generally, what I look for is three ecological drivers when it comes to attracting wildlife. That's going to be food, water, and shelter. It's always a good thing to look out for these three things when it comes to your airport, because it doesn't matter if your airport is in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia, or in the middle of a rainforest here in Singapore, or in Philippines, or in a temperate area like Japan or US. There's always going to be these three things. So always make sure, sometimes it can be, again, a little tricky. There's so many things attracting our so many attractants, right? Well, you can kind of categorize them into these three, and then that can you can tackle your game plan from that. So when I look at food, food can be anything from rubbish bins left over. Sometimes a lot of vultures and crows are attracted to those rubbish bins, but also animals like monkeys and other scavengers like boars. So it's not always bird strikes. That's why we like to say wildlife strikes. But also food can look like something very different. So it can be grass, very long grass, so much so that the grass seeds. And what that can do is that can be a food source for a lot of small grain-eating birds as well. So something to look out for when you're, a lot of different things can be a food source to a lot of different birds. And then also water in the airport. It's not just for birds to drink. So water is a major key point because it can be actually used for food as well. That can be the food source, right? So that can be fish, amphibians, crustaceans. They can all live within a water source, attracting birds or other animals to forage. But also, water is a tricky one too, because water can also be a shelter. So a lot of water birds live within the reeds or mangroves of a body of water. So there are many ways to mitigate something like water. Again, we only have a short time here, but things like netting, line over water, are certain, netting up a drain or a canal. Also, something to look out for are different, maybe wet or monsoon seasons. Those wet or monsoon seasons can actually flood parts of your airport, and all of a sudden your airport looks like a rice field, and it looks very yummy to different birds like this Asian openbill I threw in the slides here. So yeah, another thing is to look at the environment around the airport. So we like to call that a vicinity survey. Actually, ICAO recommends a 13 km vicinity survey. So that's going to be all of the area around the airport. So you'll find that places that you don't even think of can be attractants for wildlife. That can be anything from construction sites to golf courses. And sometimes you'll find places like nature parks or national parks or even golf courses, like I mentioned earlier, are actually trying to attract birds, and they're right next to your airport. So it kind of goes to show that communicating with your stakeholders is a key topic and a key role in wildlife hazard management in your airport. So making sure you have relationships with these people around your airport. I can actually use an example here. We have an Asian openbill stork, and it's near an airport. and they're a migratory bird. We worked with the construction sites and other stakeholders outside of the airport to we had a big round open table. What are we going to do about this migrating open bill stork? And we kind of came up with a game plan from there. So it was dispersal techniques that we could use to disperse the birds, the open bills. Also, maybe looking at their food source, we noticed that they ate a lot of the snails. And it was an invasive snail species. So we looked at potentially eliminating the snail population and other different things like netting certain water parts in the construction site. So even though it's not in the airport, we're still kind of using these, we're managing these environments outside the airport because it's close to the airport. So just a little bit about vicinity surveys there, and that wildlife is attracted to food, water, and shelter, both in and out of the airport. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to show you this cup I'm drinking my coffee from. This is a place called NEP, which is a rewilding project in the UK with lots of animals. Oh yeah, and a big stork. So a great example with leading on from Sam's presentation there and slides is that this place called NEP is within or on the edge of a 13-kilometer area from an airport, a safeguarded area, and there's been a reintroduction of white storks, at least 50 mating pairs and at least 20 flightless, which they've recovered from Poland, that have been injured or whatever. And so there's a reintroduction of big birds within the vicinity of an airport. So what can the airport do about that? And are there any regulations which would preclude that or restrict that or make constraints? Well, actually, there aren't. And even if there were, it would be very hard to produce evidence from a regulatory point of view that those birds way down the road, 13 kilometers, 7 miles or whatever, would be causing a flight safety hazard to that airport. Because the argument would be that the airport would have its own mechanisms to ensure that the birds within its flight paths are being managed, identified, and the hazardous ones are being managed out or controlled. So you have this kind of dichotomy increasingly around the world in all sorts of places that I've been to, where you have conservation and environmental issues going on in the vicinity of airports. Reintroduction of wetlands or parks or golf courses that are all going to attract with water features, or apartment buildings which are being attracted to new purchasers by having water features. And that leads on to another subject that I'd been involved with many years ago, where there was a swan strike, a multiple swan strike in the vicinity of a big airport. And the airport requested permission to remove or use control beyond the airport, way beyond the airport actually, but they were creating the flight safety hazard, and there was a multiple swan strike one morning. At least 6 swans were struck by a small business jet landing, and it gave you an indication of when you walk around airfields, just what type of hazards are there. But the point being, is Sam talked about the requirements for a 13-kilometer bird circle to be surveyed. What we realized was that many airports, in order to satisfy the regulator, will purely say this is our 13-kilometer bird survey, and it will be a map on the wall with pins that they've showed me, and they will do that purely to demonstrate compliance to the regulator. So I would then say, so when was the last time you went to these particular points where you have a pin? What type of birds were there? How big were the birds? What seasonality and population changes were there throughout the year? Migratory patterns, etc. What are the feeding habits? What are the local attractions, etc.? And they would often look at you with a blank expression and say, well, we didn't think we need to do that level of detail. We just have to do a 30-kilometer bird survey. So that's what we've done. That's what the regulation says. So I'm going back to the point I made earlier, really, is that it's not just about having a regulation and being compliant with a very bland one paragraph of a regulation. It's far more than that. It's far more tangible, and there's far more detail that is required to satisfy a regulator. Notwithstanding, it is compliant. But actually, if the guys and some of the places I've been to would only go to these places barely once a year or once every 3 years. They just didn't have the manpower to be able to go off airport to these places around the airfields, because invariably they didn't have they had resource issues, vehicle issues, or they had to bring people in on overtime, as well as running the day job on bird control, wildlife hazard team. They didn't have capacity to go off airfield, which would take days and days and weeks. So they just didn't bother going. And so it became a static picture of a 13-kilometer bird circle, which they got round to refreshing every 3 years, and maybe invite a third party to carry out that on their behalf, with a very much more comprehensive data set and observations listed. So it was really about what is the role of the regulator when we talk about a 13-kilometer bird circle. And I would suggest that the CEAs have very little involvement in that activity, notwithstanding that you should provide one, or you should do the activity. So we have this kind of dissecting of the word. What do we mean by should? That's not a shall, it is a should, and it's in ICAO it's a recommendation. It's not a hard and fast rule. So when I was in charge of the UK policies, I realised that many airports just could not achieve a consistent application of a 13-kilometer bird circle. So I then adjusted the wording to say, look, if you can't do 13 kilometers, work out what the area you can do and that you can do very well. And so if it's 10 kilometers, demonstrate what you do within 10 kilometers. If it's 5 kilometers and you do it consistently, monthly, weekly, whatever, then tell us that's what you do. And tell us that the 13-kilometer is an ambition that we'll do once every 3 years. But even if it's 1 kilometer, but we'll do the 1 kilometer, we'll clear every piece of attractant. We know what the birds are, we know what the feeding habits are, we know what the seasonality is like. So show us what you do and tell us how effective it is, and let's look at the data set. So to see whatever you're doing, has that demonstrated in a bird strike reduction or a strike reduction of the hazardous species? So you build a bigger picture of not so much of compliance, but in terms of effectiveness of the airport's wildlife hazard management plan. And I've worked with a number of regulators to change the mindset about this, because it's not just push it all back to the airport operator. We need to work in partnership, and we appreciate that the off airfield in the vicinity issues in the 13-kilometer involve a myriad of stakeholders and partners that the airport has to buddy up with and join forces with, supported by the CEAs, supported by government organisations, conservation organisations, environmental organisations. It's not just the role and the responsibility of an airport operator, because invariably they don't have the authority to do stuff outside the airport, and to request permission to clear swathes of land of some kind of harvested farming product or crop is going to be almost impossible to achieve. And so we do get to a position where I've worked at different places where there's been issues with abattoirs, where people are living very close to the airport boundary fence, and the abattoirs have created a feeding for vultures, and there were certain trees in the area where the birds would sit in the evening. And on my second visit to the place, I was very disappointed that they hadn't actually talked about clearing or working with the tribal leaders of the abattoir. They actually just chopped the trees down that have been there for probably 200, 300, 400 years. Lovely old trees, and they were some of them were in the schoolyard on the flight line of an airport, a big international airport. And it was the sadness that I saw. I just looked beyond the runway in a flight line, and I said, "Where's the tree gone?" You can see it probably 2 to 3 miles away. And they decided, after you came the first time, we just thought we'd chop the tree down so the vultures would go away. But it wasn't the tree that was attracting the vultures to the vicinity. It was the abattoir in the town centre, in the market area. And so it was very interesting to have this discussion and look down upon the airport and everything around it, the people, the lifestyle or livestock that was going on. So it does take more than just a quick fix of chopping something down and burning off the airfield or the fields beyond the runway. It's going to take far more than that. So that's why we will discuss it in detail about working in partnership with the people and the players around your airports. Over to you, Sam.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. I always like that story. It's a good story about it was what country exactly was that in, Nick, with the tree?
The tree that was well, it was in Africa. I said it was in the
Oh
African
yeah.
Yeah, I won't name the country, but I don't think they're represented.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And just to add on the subject of the swans, so the swans were relocated to an area beyond the 13 kilometers of the specific airport that had the multiple bird strike. But they put them into a population of other swans, which were within 13 kilometers of another airport. But the other airport hadn't had the bird strike, and hadn't really identified swans as necessarily a big issue. And so you can see where the airports weren't talking to each other because they're in competition with each other to a degree. But it was done in isolation without involving different stakeholders. So we want to move the swans that are hazardous to our airport to a place, actually, it's not that far from your airport, but there wasn't that level of conversation going on. So it was really interesting about how we need to have conversations with the right people and have a serious thought about what we want to do with animals and birds in the vicinity. And there's no silver bullet, there's no quick or easy fix for this issue.
Very true. Awesome. Over to you, Moobs, for a more ground ops perspective.
All right, thanks, Sam. So, thank you, Sam and Nick, for that good story. So let's talk more about the ground side of the air side perspective for the attractants. So we have things like in the photo here, a very grassy drain. So these can be potential attractants to wildlife, not only birds, it can be other animals or reptiles too. So some airports do adopt a long grass policy or a short grass policy, but it has to change in time. For example, one of the airport that I went to recently, they have been adopting a short grass policy, but it has shown to be rather ineffective, and more birds are coming. So rather we have consulted with them and we have given them the recommendation to adopt a longer grass policy. That's so you can plan your grass cutting schedule better. So more about drainage improvements. So we have certain airports that we have large drains or water retention areas. So that could be possible attractants too for birds. Would come there, they would fish, they would take a bath. So how do we stop that from happening? We could have things like line over water that was mentioned by Sam earlier. So line over water basically is just multiple lines just across the river or the canal, just to make sure that birds do not go near and they get kept away from the area that's protecting the airside. So for exclusion fence, it also depends on how high the fences is and whether birds, because as we know, raptors, they like to perch on high areas and look for their food. So that is also a thing that we need to keep in mind at all times. So for example, a real life experience that we've done in Singapore itself is a line over water project that we have done where there was a canal that was frequented by some egrets around the area, which is also a high risk species. Therefore, we've given them the what do you call that? The idea to do a line over water to protect the area, and thus the egrets are kept away from the area. It's more of a better management system. All right, back to you, Sam.
Cool. Thank you. And something to note too is that we're talking about all these different perspectives. It's really good for everyone in your airport, from the ground team to your biologist to maybe your CAA or policymakers, to talk about these things in a room together. Communication is key. So I might not notice that. Let's say Moobs notices that there's a lot of really grassy drain that's attracting a lot of snakes. Maybe I would overlook that, or maybe someone up in the office would overlook that, right? So this communication is, again, super, super key to all of these topics that we discuss. So my other topics, so we did two, we're on our third one here, is kind of a hot topic in technology and innovation. So what I mean by this is I'm sure it's just human nature. We love big brand new devices. We always want the newest phones and the newest TVs and everything like that. And the same can be said in the aviation industry. So I do really think that new tools such as avian radars or robot dogs are really, really great, especially avian radars can be a great way to get a lot of data. It's the most beneficial when you have someone like a biologist to actually analyze and trend that data. That kind of goes back to my data module. But what I want to focus on in my little bit here is how more traditional, sometimes low-tech solutions can be just as useful, especially for airports that might have a lower budget. So one of my favorite examples is actually in Amsterdam. So that's Schiphol Airport. We do not do any work for them. It's just one of my favorite examples. I think it's super cool. So what the airport did is basically they were seeing a lot of damaging strikes or strikes with geese. And what were those geese eating? They were eating sugar beets of some sort. So what the airport did is it's surrounded by farms. So I kind of talked a little bit earlier about the importance of stakeholder management and talking to the people in your airport vicinity. So what they did is they talked with the farms that were around the airport, and they actually used the pigs from the farms to eat up any scraps of the sugar beets, so that the geese wouldn't be as they wouldn't come in as much. They wouldn't be as attracted to the air side. So I think that's a really interesting way, and also a very cheap way to mitigate the problem. It isn't you're the newest robot out there that's color that's you know what I mean. So as much as all of that stuff is very cool, and I do recommend a lot of different high-tech technologies, sometimes just being creative and taking a step back, looking at your airport and coming up with technology that can be as simple as pigs. So definitely there's also a need for long-term studies on the lasting value on some of this new tech. So I will give that perspective as well from a more scientific or biologist perspective. But something that I just wanted to note here is that the newest and flashiest tool, though it's very cool, sometimes you can use something creative like what Schiphol did here with pigs. So off to you, Nick, from a more policy perspective here.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I've been involved with a number of companies over many years. I'm talking 15 to 20 years, where they used to come to the CEA and say, we've got this new piece of equipment that's going to sort all the bird strikes out. It's like a magic wand, a silver bullet. And we were, okay, yeah, so show us the trials, show us the data. Oh, well, we haven't got around to doing the data yet. So let's talk about how effective it is. Let's go out to an airport. Let's trial somewhere. Let's find a friendly partner airport that we can go out to have a look to see how it works. And I'm talking about things like lasers, LRAD, long-range acoustic devices. I'm talking about drones and robots, etc., and even avian radar. And I'm going back at least 15 years where all this stuff was discussed and expositions were made to the CEAs, and they all wanted the CEA approval of a piece of equipment that would work and is authorized and not so much regulated, but is approved by the CEA for use. So we always stood back and said, look, we're never going to give you a CEA approval. We'll say, okay, let's show us how it might work, show us if it can work, show us if it does work. And we will happily go to an airport and say, look, we support your ambitions to use this equipment as a number of other tools that you have in your toolbox that will help your teams manage and effectively reduce the risk of bird strikes or to hazardous species, etc. But very few of them actually did or could demonstrate they had a material reduction on bird strikes. And so it became a very expensive tool for lots of airports, where we would also discuss with the airport management to say, look, well, how much are you spending on this equipment in terms of either initial purchase or a licensing agreement or a maintenance contract with the company, as opposed to how much you spend on your training budget for your team, who need shotguns, who need ammunition, who need whips, who need maybe have dogs, who have trapping equipment, or a myriad of other things which are used on the foot by the teams who are driving around constantly, doing that kind of active bird control. So we said, look, if you want to use equipment to supplement and support these guys in their roles, please go ahead and by all means. But we didn't want them to sort of change the mindset of saying, well, the budget we were using for people is now going to go to equipment. And sad to say that I have been to quite a few airports, I won't mention them, where I've seen equipment that was purchased on the back of a sales pitch at a bird strike conference, wherever it was. I know where it was. And the airport were kind of sold a piece or two pieces of equipment which cost them, let's say, in the ballpark of 50,000 US dollars. And yet the team that I spoke to on the ground were crying out for training, crying out for equipment. And the management of the airfield was so poor because they couldn't get contractors on there. The contractors weren't being paid, so they didn't come back to complete cutting and taken away. And this just gave me a real picture of the airports often are so keen to use technology in favor of people rather than supporting the people. So we would always put the position of the CEAs don't need to regulate equipment technology. We support it, we encourage it, and of course there's lots of things happening now. And the other perspective is that the people that are creating or producing and selling these pieces of equipment are far ahead of the CEAs. It's like the CEAs are 5 to 10 years behind whatever happens at an airfield or an airport in terms of innovation. The CEAs are or the standard setting bodies and the regulators are usually 5 to 10 years behind, because it takes so long to change regulations. So the regulations and the standards are written in such a way that they will support the use of any equipment, and it doesn't need to be approved or regulated by the CEA, and there don't need to be specific performance measures. But having said that, there are actually performance and operational standards for things like FOD radar. If you're going to have a FOD radar, it shall do this and it shall do that. So it's detecting, it's identifying, and it has continuous monitoring, and it's building data, etc. So we can have guidance and manuals that are written, but very few CEAs have the technical competencies or the resources to do that, other than, I will say, the FAA and perhaps Transport Canada and perhaps CASA in Australia. So in terms of the big CEAs around the world do have a resource capability and a technical competency to do that kind of stuff. But for most stuff that I see used as tech around airports, it doesn't need to have specific technical operational performance standards or guidance. It's like, see if it works, see if you can have a trial for at least a year, go through the seasons and see and get the guys to use it, because it'll actually be a good evidence for the company to sell the equipment if it actually works and can be demonstrated to approved and measured, with a reduction in bird strikes and a reduction of hazardous species. So I would say less regulation in this context is better, but the CA should fully endorse and support innovation and technology. And we'll discuss some of this and some of the other pieces of equipment later in a course, perhaps later this year, in a lot more detail.
Perfect. Thanks, Dick. Moops?
Yep. All right. So now let's talk more about the ground perspective of the technology and innovation. So what works in practice versus what looks good on paper. So we cannot put what looks good on paper with practice together, because sometimes what looks good on paper isn't really good for practice on the ground itself. So on the ground, we need to know the area, the different types of birds that needs to be scared off, that needs to be dispersed off. So we need to know the different technologies that's being used. Like you can see me in this photo here. So a bit of a background of this photo. This is actually one of the newest airport in Cambodia, Techo International Airport. So we've had the privilege of going over and giving them good training for the use of different new equipments for bird dispersals. So like what I'm holding there is actually a gas cannon, and right beside me I have a whip with me. So things like the gas cannon, it can be used more mobile. So you can carry it around and you can just use it more mobilely. So we have to integrate these new technologies and the new systems being bought by your airport to the current programs that you guys have. So for example, if you have a current dispersal schedule, we need to know that with which tools we can use for each kind of dispersal. So speaking about tools, when you have a toolbox, your toolbox has to be filled with equipments because not one tool can handle all dispersals because that would cause habituation to the birds. So some birds, they get rather habituated by different dispersal tools. For example, an LRAD, some birds can get habituated by that, and in maybe like 2 months, 3 months down the road, when you're using it, the birds don't really budge around also. So we have to keep it changing, and you cannot let the bird habituate to one certain tool. Um, and also, when doing your bird scares, you must also always remember of the direction of where you want to scare the birds off. You do not want to scare them from the turf to the runway. So you always want to aim the dispersal away from the runway. Yep. That's all for me. Back to you, Sam.
Perfect. Yeah, I really like that picture. Also, the person who took the picture I hear is really awesome too. It was me.
That's you.
Uh, all right. So last one I wanted to talk about is training and culture. So I kind of mashed these together because, of course, we all know training is good, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the safety culture that comes with training and wildlife hazard management in general. So my biologist perspective here. Again, that's a recent picture of us, the team. So this would be more of a ground ops team. What I like to look into when I'm thinking about training is don't do training for training's sake. Don't make it a big safety lecture where a bunch of people come and stare at slides. I know that's kind of what we're doing today, but I think the most successful training programs are tailored to the people that are taking them. So do more of operations, a ground training for a lot of your ground personnel, or maybe if you have airport managers, have them go to more of a managerial course, and something that it really the people that go really end up taking something from it. So again, maybe that's wildlife ID training for people on the ground, or maybe that's what to do with different policy for different. So yeah, I think my biggest takeaway here is just the importance of not just your average basic safety training, but the importance of actually implementing a more tailored program, I would say. And also, another thing to add here would be also to make sure it kind of goes back to what Nick was saying earlier. If you're getting an LRAD or a radar, make sure that you guys are trained on it so that if you spent a lot of money on a piece of equipment, these equipments are amazing. They're really cool, but and they can be very, very useful, especially for good data that I mentioned earlier. But it's not going to be useful if you're not trained on it and using it. So sometimes we see with airports, they buy the biggest and most expensive tool, but they're not trained on it. So then it ends up in an airport shed 2 years later. So we don't want that to happen. We want you to get the most out of these tools. So I also want to emphasize training on certain tools. But with that, I can bring it over to Nick.
One of my, I suppose, frustrations over the years as a regulator, over many, many years, and working with operators and airlines and other stakeholders was, why do we allow, let's say, unapproved training for people doing things like bird control, even ground operations to an extent, as opposed to, if we think about the aviation community, pilots, air traffic controllers, and aircraft engineers, they all are required to conduct or to have completed approved training or training at an approved establishment, somewhere an organization that is being assessed by a regulatory body or some kind of standard setting body to meet a specific set of minimum requirements, which are going to qualify them to do a job, either fly or control aircraft or to fix aircraft. So why is it we've allowed over many, many years training to be so haphazard for people doing a very important safety, front end safety role? And I think it's because it's seen to be by a lot of airport operators, to meet the compliance, we don't have to have we just have to have trained people. but the regulations don't say what the training should consist of. And so nobody's actually got together and sat down with anybody other than ICAO in more recent terms with Mastermark to go through and produce a syllabus which says these are the basic minimum standards, these are the basic minimum contents that should be covered, not really a shall, but should be covered. And so regulators have really sat back and thought, we don't need to worry about this. We'll let the airport operators decide what training they need to have, but we'll tell them your staff shall be competent. They'll be trained, and they'll have to show us a certificate that they've attended a course. But we all know, having attended a course or a conference, or even today, if you had a certificate from it, doesn't mean to say you're necessarily competent, and that your performance in terms of being competent is demonstrated. So the rules will say, your staff doing birth control will have to have initial training, and they have to have a recurrent training every 18 months, 2 years or whatever. And I've been to so many training courses where we had long-standing members of staff who'd been there, let's say 15 to 20 years. And they were like, here we go again. I've got to do the recurrent training. And they were completely switched off to it because I've been there, I've seen it, I've done the job. And yet when I was out with them, looking at their birth control and in terms of the performance and how effective they were, I was shocked how poor they were. Not that they were untrained or but they were unmotivated to carry out training, or they thought they knew better than the people providing training. So there's a whole bunch of issues around this in terms of if we are going to provide training for people, it's got to be applied at the coalface, at the front end, and it's got to be from people who have competency, knowledge, and vast amounts of experience. And there are people today on the call today who have that. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be a regulated activity, but I would propose that some CAs could be looking to look at the training providers as opposed to allowing, let's say, or potentially incompetent people who are carrying out training but claiming to be experts, either as sole operators or setting up a new company but without any real credibility as to what their background is or how they gained their own expertise and competency in them providing training to an airport or as a consultant to a bunch of operators or other stakeholders. So we really need to think about the kind of what is the basic composition of a safety training framework, but we can work together on that. We can take Annex 14, we can take the parts in Doc 9137 and other documents around the world that we can take the best pieces out of, and think about what is the basic structure of a training program. But it's not just about a classroom. It's got to be applied in the field with mentoring and with people show and tell. And so that's why it's really important to have people on the ground who you can call upon, who can buddy up and mentor people who've done the job before and have done it well, and have a demonstrative track record of being used by really good stakeholders. And so they have really good feedback, and it rather than these new guys that are just turning up and selling their ways and their wares on LinkedIn as a new training provider, but without actually having ever done the job or having never sat with a standard setting body either nationally or internationally, but all of a sudden they're now an expert in bird control, wildlife hazard management. So just beware that of going out there trying to fix something because of need to be compliant, but talk to the right people and engage with the likes of Mastermark and other people, and to look for that kind of rubber stamp of approval by a standard setting body or a regulatory body, internationally or nationally. And it hasn't always got to be an aviation academy. There could be an educational organization that has a structure that the training framework has to sit within. In terms of a bona fide qualification, perhaps, which something in Europe and the UK is happening right now for airfield operations. It's not one element of which is wildlife hazard management, but there's a suite of issues that guys who work out on the apron are required to be trained and competent on. So we built a framework and a way of assessing that performance, as well as the classroom elements of that. So it can be done, and we have various ways and means of demonstrating that.
Cool. It looks like it's 5 o'clock. So, this is our last module. Moobs, go over yours a little bit, and then anyone can feel free to drop off. But I think we'll probably go to about 5:15 Singapore time, just to give us a little bit more time for a Q&A. But anyway, take all yours, Moobs.
Thank you, Sam. So let's talk more about training for on ground. So training is more of a show, not just tell. So you can just tell your ground staff, go and disperse off the birds. Do they know how to? No. So how do you make sure they know what they're doing? So get trainers, get certified trainers to show them, to train them on the proper techniques of dispersal. Dispersal can go very south very fast. Non-trained staff can just disperse a bird off just by looking at it and like, oh, the bird is there. They can just go there, stomp their feet while the flight is landing or taking off, and it can cause a strike. So dispersal is more of when, where, and why, and how we do it, and what we use. So that goes to the number 2 point, staff engagement. Why explaining the why matters as much as the how. So if we show them how to do it, we need to teach them why it is important, and when and why it's very important. So we need to tell them that at certain points, high risk zones, low risk zones, we need to teach them of the proper ways, the proper techniques of dispersing. And that goes to my previous point of toolbox, not to just have one tool, and to have multiple tools in your toolbox to properly manage the dispersal situation. So at the end of the day, after each dispersal, we can have debriefs to go over with our ground staff and just check in with them. What tools are used today for the dispersal? We need to get the staff to see whether the birds are starting to get habituated by each tool, so we can just switch the tools around and make sure that the dispersal goes in a better phase. Yep, that will be what I'll say. Sam, back to you.
Yeah, something to add here is in this picture, it kind of shows you with bird spikes. So
Yep.
maybe something I would add to your on the ground perspective too is that it's not all just dispersals. I know a lot of people think dispersals are the only way, but showing some proactive measures like bird proofing or certain structures and stuff like that is just as important as dispersals, which I think you would agree with.
Yep, true.
Perfect. Okay, so that completes our 4 hot topics. Hopefully, you guys got something out of it. I know we had fun, but something I did want to mention as well is that we actually do have our own training courses if anyone is interested. I know a lot of you on the call have already attended, you know who you are, but we actually have a wildlife hazard management course in Singapore. We have that in person or virtual, as well as an in person for wildlife hazard operations. So the reason that we do the operations just in person here in Singapore is because we just have so much to show, like actually how to fire a gas cannon and exactly how to ID certain birds from afar, all that kind of stuff. It's just not the same in virtually. So that one is in person, but the wildlife hazard management, please feel free to come in person, and it's a good networking opportunity, but also you can do that one virtually as we did last year. We actually had someone from almost every continent. No Antarctica, but we're still hoping for one, maybe. But yeah, please feel free to scan the QR code if you're interested. This is partnered with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University here in Singapore, their Asia branch, and it is the only ICAO certified course. So something fun and exciting for sure. So with that. I asked you guys, you can feel free to ask us any questions in the chat, and we're more than happy to answer them, or at least attempt to answer them. So feel free to type those in, and we can answer those. If not, maybe I'll leave the video open for about 5 minutes. The questions are on WhatsApp.
No, I mean,
we will answer them as they come in.
I think there's a question by Vinay regarding the restrictions by airport authority not allowing drones and robot dogs. What else can be used to scare black kites from operational area, in particular to Middle East airports? Okay, so I would like to answer that question for you, Vinay. So, like I've mentioned earlier, so our toolbox must be filled with various equipments, not only, yes, due to certain restrictions by some airports, drones, robot dogs, those are not allowed in the airport. So it's understandable. So we have other tools, more like we have whips, we have gas cannon, we have loud hailers to assist with the dispersal. So not only drones and robot dogs can help, we also have other equipments that can assist you with the dispersals. So we always must remember one thing, that our toolbox must always be filled with various types of equipments, be it visual, dispersal, audio, or even touch. Yeah.
Something I'll add on to Moobs there is that it's always good to look for the bird's food source or why they're coming to the airside. So when it comes to black kites, I know they're big rodent eaters. In certain areas, they are also big fish eaters as well. So what you can do if you happen to get bird strikes of the black kite, what I would do and what we have done in many different airports is we actually dissect their stomach. When we open up their stomach contents, we can identify what exactly that those black kites are eating. So let's say you open the stomach, you dissect the stomach, and you see that they're eating a lot of rats, let's say. That tells you, oh, I need to work on my rat problem in the air side. So maybe you would get a rodent side that you could spread, or another thing you could do is maybe fill rodent burrows in the airport. So that's something to look at as well. It's not just the dispersals. You can also be a little bit more proactive and look at getting rid of that food source as well.
Just to come in on this question from Vinay, there's no actual real reason why an airport authority should restrict use of drones or dogs unless it can demonstrate they're unsafe. So we worked with an airport operator a number of years ago who was looking to trial Robird or drone. And we know that airports are using drones a lot now for airport survey, aerodrome survey, and collecting data for obstacles, heights, and measurements, etc., etc. So drones used on and around airports can be used safely. We're not talking about the invasive drones which can interrupt air traffic and etc. We're talking about equipment that can be used effectively for the purpose of flight safety or for collecting data. And so what we did, we worked with the airport authority in question. We came up with a set of guidance and rules and a risk assessment protocol, which we actually published in the UK's bird strike, let's say wildlife hazard management guidance material, which was a template that if another airport wants to consider use of drones, for example, for bird dispersal or whatever, or even just monitoring what beyond the eye line or into the trees or whatever, they can be used safely if following this kind of set of guidelines and protocols. So I would say that for an airport just to say they're not allowed it's a black and white issue for them, but they haven't really considered the issue enough. And I think increasingly we have to see more flexibility and understand that it's very easy to say no, you can't do it, but then there has to be a justification as to why it can't be used. Invariably, they can be used safely. So I would advocate a discussion, maybe a working group with a myriad of stakeholders, including air traffic, etc., to work through how they can be used safely.
It looks like we have some other questions as well. This one is for you, Mubarak. Could you please clarify what height is being considered under long grass policy and short grass policy in the context of wildlife hazard management? Like every airport habitat, environment, bird species are different. I can start it off. And then Moobs, if you want to say anything, that would be good.
Sure.
Exactly what you kind of said in your message here. So some airports might want a short grass policy, some might want a long grass policy. It really depends on what your high risk bird species are. So it's dependent on what species are exactly in your airport, and that can be different from an airport in your same country, but in a different ecosystem. So let's say your high risk species are egrets, let's say. I would recommend maybe, let's come up with a different one. Let's say your high risk species are seed or grain eating birds like munias or larks or something like that. They actually eat, like I kind of mentioned earlier, they eat the seeds and the grains off of the grasses. So, and they also can hide within the grass. So you're going to want a short grass management program. But an example of a high grass management program, Moobs, could you give that maybe?
All right. So
Where you would want a
typically,
long grass?
sure. So typically, if you see on IKO, the short grass policy is about 6 to 8 inches of height for the grass. So anything longer than that is already considered a high grass policy. We also need to think that there are certain types of bird species that love the long grass policy because they can lay eggs. They can use the long grass as a nest. So we need to see which airport you are at, which bird species you have, for us to properly advise you on whether to use a long grass or a short grass policy. Yep, it's for me. It's for Mr. VJ. Hope that answers your question. If there's any other questions, please feel free to ask us.
It
Well,
looks
just
like
one.
thank you guys for asking so many questions. This is great. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but we'll try to answer maybe 3 more. I'll start with another one. It says, please share data collection systems or software that you're using in your airport. So this is actually not as complicated as you may think. So it really, when it comes to collection systems, data collection, I assume you're talking about point counts of let's say doing dawn and dusk wildlife or bird surveys. And what we use is actually a free app. For different airports, we might use different data collection services, but we use something called QField. It's a free app. It's like QGIS. And what we can do is it has a map of the airport, and you have to make an account, and you can actually, put the species name, the abundance of the species, what exactly the species is doing. And kind of earlier in my module, I kind of talked about good data, and that you want to add maybe a bird is a juvenile, or the bird is foraging, or the bird went this way or that way. You can also add notes in that app as well. So I can be like, if I see one black kite, I could say one black kite, I can pin it exactly where I saw it. Then I can also say maybe it was a juvenile, and I can also put in the notes that it was perching, and then maybe it flew to Whiskey Tango, something like that. So definitely something that feel free to email me if you want some more information. I believe everyone should have my email. Yeah, that's kind of what I would say about data collection. But there are many different ways you can do it as well. Nick?
Just to come in on Ilyas's question about, do I think the regulations are robust enough? Well, I wouldn't argue, but I would say yes, they are, because regulation doesn't fix aviation safety in any context. There's not one example where a regulation necessarily will fix an issue or reduce an issue. It's down to the people on the ground, and this is where I've tried to just give that little taster of, we need to think about performance and efficacy, or the effectiveness of a wildlife hazard management program from an airport compliance perspective. So it's not about regulatory compliance, because having been an inspector and policymaker for 20-30 years, I can tell you, I can count on one hand, probably even 2 fingers maybe, how many airports I've ever attended, and I'm talking about 50 to 100 plus, probably I lose count of places, that have ever been, in my view, non-compliant. So because the regulations have to be written to fit across the world, from, let's say, Western Europe, North America, to other places that are less competent perhaps, or still developing, or are run by a government agency, or run under a very different political system. And so the regulations have to fit a myriad of stakeholders up and down and around the world. So to put more and more regulations will just mean more non-compliance. It won't necessarily be an effective tool, because it'll effectively say to more people, more and more operators, you're non-compliant. Whereas actually what we want to do is help them become not so much compliant, but become better. So, and for their performance to improve, they don't need to worry about or concern. Often is the case, a regulation is, do you have a document, i.e., do you have a wildlife management plan? Do you have data or a means of collecting data? Do you have a safeguarding system that talks about, as we have beyond the airport boundary in the 30 kilometers? All that good stuff kind of sits in slow time and works its way. But actually down to the people on the ground doing the job that Moobs has been looking at, it's like, how do we make these people, how do we make them better at what they're doing? How do they understand what they're doing is good? And if you think about the strap line, what does good look like? Put that in your own mind, and then think about what bad looks like. And then we can kind of like close the gap between what bad and good is. And so everybody goes up a gear together. So, and that's what we should be. And so I would really advocate sharing information with your local stakeholders, but also within your own state, your national bird strike or wildlife hazard committee. Talk to your stakeholders, share what you do, share data. There should be no restriction to sharing data. Look, we've had bird strikes by black kites. Well, we don't have any black kites because we've dealt with them by doing X, Y, Z. You can give your information to the other airport and they can think, oh, maybe we should try that. You don't necessarily need to have dogs and whatever it was to deal with your black kites. There are lots of airports. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of airports around the world who perfectly manage to control and mitigate the severity or the risk by black kites without having to buy equipment. They have people who know what they're doing. They know what's in the surroundings and what's attracting them, etc., etc. So there are lots and lots of ways, but more regulation is not required, is my view.
Okay, we're already about 20 minutes over, but it looks like most of you are still here, so that must mean you're not you don't mind that much. So maybe we'll do one more question. I think I'll pick this one. It says it's for Moobs here. Can you share the guidelines and risk assessment for using a gas cannon? So maybe guidelines and also what are the risks?
All right, so for gas cannons, okay, I have to be pretty detailed, so I think the best is if you could join us for our training. But just to be brief, guidelines for gas cannon is also it starts from how you keep, how you store, all the way to when and where to use it. For the risk assessments is also for you to just check on the pressure, the gas pressure, and also of how to spark it, whether the spark arrestor is in a right position or not. It's pretty detailed, so which will be shared more with our physical training to be more clear.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we are definitely running over. So I will haul over to our last slide, which is thank you so much. We know your days are very busy and you chose to spend an hour with us. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions, please feel free to head over to airportbiologist.com. You can shoot us any question, or if we didn't answer your question today, we can answer those on the site there. And you can also use this QR down here for easy access as well. So thank you again so much. And I personally want to thank Nick Yearwood and Abdul Mubaraq for coming on today. So thank you guys. And hopefully we'll see you at a course coming up later in November. If not, if you have any other questions for us, do feel free to ask. We really enjoy all of this. So we really like to answer your questions. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot. All the best.
Thanks a lot. Thank
Cheers,
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.